All right, with that, the time is now 10:03, and we're going to go ahead and get started with today's presentation. Good morning, everyone. My name is Matthew Marquez, Community Relations Officer with LA Metro, and thank you for joining us this morning for today's public scoping meeting for the Metro Sepulveda Transit Corridor Project. You're joining us just at the beginning of the environmental process, a very key milestone that will help us determine the environmental impacts of this project. And so we thank you for joining us at this early stage of the project, as well as joining us on a Saturday morning. And we always appreciate everyone's time taken to join us during these meetings and provide your valuable feedback. So thank you all for joining us. Next slide. As we start today's meeting, we have a couple of housekeeping items and general announcements that we'd like to make before we get started with today's formal presentation. And rest assured, there will be plenty of opportunity to provide oral comments during today's meeting if you'd like to provide official comments on the presentation that you see today. And we'll go over more details about public comments later on. But first, we want to let everyone know that Spanish interpretation is available for today's meeting, and we have an interpreter that is available. So if you do wish to listen to today's meeting in Spanish and using Spanish audio, click on the interpretation icon on your menu, and you can pick the language that you'd like to listen to, in which case it would be Spanish. We've also posted the Spanish translated presentation in the chat as well too. Elizabeth, if we can repost that, that would be great for those that may have entered a little bit later. But we do have the presentation available in Spanish as well too. And now I'm going to introduce Ben, who will make the same announcement in Spanish. Ben?
Buenos días, gracias por acompañarnos. Interpretación en español está siendo proveída por Zoom. Haga clic en el icono Interpretación. Escoja la opción para escuchar en español. El enlace de la presentación en español está disponible en el chat. Gracias.
Thank you so much, Ben. Next slide. Oh, excellent. We have a couple of additional housekeeping items for today's webinar. We do want to let you know that today's meeting is being recorded. However, your cameras are not on. We're not seeing your cameras for today's meeting. And your microphones are currently muted. However, during the public comment section, there will be an opportunity to unmute yourself and provide oral public comment. Oral public comments will follow today's formal presentation, and we'll be using the raise hand icon to indicate whether or not you want to provide an oral comment. But we'll be providing later further instructions on how to do so following today's formal presentation. If at any point during today's meeting you need technical support, we have staff on hand to provide support to you and troubleshoot any issues you may be having. If you need technical support, you can call or text the number on your screen, area code 213-600-9039. And once again, for anybody that is joining us from a neighborhood council, elected officials office, homeowners association, or other group and representing those groups, we do ask if you want to introduce yourself using the Q&A function. We'll be doing some introductions later on in today's presentation. Next slide. We also do have a code of conduct for today's meeting, as Metro wants to ensure and is committed to making sure that all participants can fairly and clearly share their ideas, comments, and concerns about the Sepulveda Transit Corridor project. And we're asking for your help to ensure that we provide a safe and equitable process during today's meeting. So a couple of reminders as we get started. One, we ask that you respect the format of today's meeting and allow everyone the opportunity to comment. We ask that while if you provide oral public comments, that you turn off any cell phones or background noise while you're speaking. We'll also make sure to do the same thing on our side. Additionally, we ask that you treat fellow community members, agency representatives, Metro staff, and others with respect. Additionally, when you are addressing any public comments to Metro, please address them to Metro staff and/or consultants. Please do not direct them to any other attendees in today's audience. We also ask that you maintain a conversational tone as you're providing any comments today. Thank you in advance for your support on this. Next slide. We also do have a general Metro announcement. You may have heard it in the news, but Metro 2 weeks ago on January 10th resumed fare collection and front door boarding on all of our buses in the system. With that, we are also offering discounted bus fare through various programs. So first things first, we are offering through our Life program, we want to make sure that we are encouraging all eligible riders to take advantage of our Life program discounts, which are currently at 50% off. And applying for the Life program has been made easier through our online English and Spanish applications, which are available on our Metro website at metro.net/writing/life. Additionally, for those newly registered to the program, you'll be receiving 90 free days of rides that are effective once your application has been approved. So exciting new discounts with that program. Additionally, for those that pay for regular fares, Metro bus fare passes are also discounted at half price through July 2022. And that includes daily, weekly, and monthly passes. So a lot of savings as we return to fares on our bus system. Next slide. So going over today's agenda, we're going to go over some welcome and introductions. Once again, if you're representing an elected official's office, homeowners association, neighborhood council, or other group, please feel free to introduce yourself in the Q&A function. We'll be doing those introductions shortly. In addition to that, we're going to be introducing our project team as well too. Following that, we'll go over our project video and today's formal scoping presentation. And then at around 11 o'clock, we'll be starting today's public comment session where you'll have an opportunity to provide comments on what you've seen today. And those will be put into our scoping record, our formal scoping record. And then we'll wrap up today's meeting just before 12 o'clock. Today's end time, we're hoping to end around noon today. However, we will be trying to accommodate as many comments as possible based on the allotted amount of time. However, there are multiple ways to provide comments in this project, and we'll show you the ways on which how to do that. And our public comment period is open through February 11th, 2022. So there still is plenty of time to provide comments on this project as we move forward. Next slide. Next, I'd like to introduce today's speakers for today's presentation. First, we have David Meeker, Executive Officer with Countywide Planning and Development. Next, we have Peter Carter, Senior Director and Project Manager for the Environmental Review Process with Countywide Planning and Development. Next, we have Jackie Sue, Senior Transportation Planner with Countywide Planning and Development. Next, we have Kavita Mehta, Deputy Executive Officer and Project Manager of our Pre-Development Agreements with Program Management. And then we have our Community Relations team, which is currently led by Jody Litvack, Senior Director with Countywide Planning and Development, and myself, Matthew Marquez, with Community Relations Officer. Next slide. As we like to start all of our meetings for the Sepulveda Transit Corridor project, we want to understand a couple of questions, where you're coming from today, and also if you've joined us before. And so we have a Zoom poll that we're going to be launching momentarily. It should just appear on your screen right now. And we have two questions for you. One, we want to know, where do you live and where are you joining us from today? Are you joining us maybe from the Valley, the West Side, maybe from downtown LA or Central LA? Maybe South LA or the Gateway Cities area, maybe from the other valley, the San Gabriel Valley, or maybe you're interested in the project from the South Bay Cities area, or North County or outside of LA County. So we appreciate your responses there. And then we also have a second question. We want to know if you participated in this project previously. Have you maybe attended a meeting in the past? Or have you submitted maybe a comment or looked at our project website or different materials in the past about this project? And so, or is this your first time potentially attending a meeting for the Sepulveda Transit Corridor project? And so we're interested to know, who's joining us for the first time and who's coming back to learn more. We'll give everybody a couple of minutes to put in their responses. And Stevie, once we're at about the 80% level, if you can go ahead and let me know, we'll go ahead and close the poll at that point. All right, we'll give everybody about 30 more seconds to put in their responses, and then we'll close the poll. Okay, Stevie, let's go ahead and see the results of our poll and share that with the audience. All right, well, thank you everybody for replying. Looks like as usual with our meetings, we're seeing a lot of San Fernando Valley and West Side representation for today's meeting. So we thank you all for joining us. This is definitely an important project for both communities. And we thank you all for joining us today. Looks like we also have a few representatives from the downtown LA and central LA area. Also some folks from the San Gabriel Valley. So thank you for joining us. And also some folks from South LA, South Bay. We have one person from North County joining us today. And we also have about 9 people joining us from outside of LA County. So great to know that we are getting folks from different areas. And then looks like on our second question here, looks like about a little over half of you have joined us in a meeting previously. So thank you for joining us again and learning more about today's project, or this project rather. And it looks like about 32 of you are joining us for the first time. So thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedules on a Saturday in particular to join us today. We appreciate you joining us and learning more, and hopefully providing us very insightful comments as we develop our draft environmental impact report, which we'll provide more details on later. And we hope to continue to engage you as this project develops. Thank you so much. And next slide. Now we're going to kick off with a short 6-minute video that will kind of bring everybody up to speed on the project and where we've been and where we're headed. Let's go ahead and start the video.
Traveling between the Valley and the West Side isn't easy or fast, and traffic will only get worse over time.
Metro has a plan to make it easier to get around. The natural barrier created by the Santa Monica Mountains makes this area complex and challenging, and will require innovation and multiple solutions. Metro is studying several projects in this area, including a new rail line with the Sepulveda Transit Corridor.
The Sepulveda Transit Corridor project can provide reliable, high-capacity public transportation to provide an alternative to traffic and help take cars off the road.
Before we get into the latest updates on this project, let's quickly catch up on our progress to date.
Metro completed a feasibility study in December 2019. The study looked at potential alternatives for traveling between the San Fernando Valley and LAX.
In our extensive outreach for this study, we received more than 1,200 public comments.
All of this public feedback and our technical analysis from the feasibility study has informed the range of proposed alternatives being advanced for environmental review.
In March 2021, the Metro Board approved pre-development agreements with LA Skyrail Express and Sepulveda Transit Corridor partners to pursue a potential public-private partnership to accelerate delivery of the Valley to West Side section of this project.
The pre-development agreements, or PDAs, bring in teams that include designers, construction contractors, and financial partners to begin working with Metro earlier, when the project is still being planned, and long before we get into heavy construction activity.
This early partnership can help to prepare designs that incorporate insights from construction and long-term operations and maintenance. This offers a life cycle approach to the project and prepares it for a possible public-private partnership. The PDA teams worked with information from Metro's feasibility study to offer their proposed alternatives using proven rail technologies.
We're now beginning environmental review. This is a formal, regulated process where Metro will study various aspects of each proposed alternative, including benefits, cost, feasibility, impacts, and any necessary mitigations.
There are several points of community input during the multi-year environmental process.
The Metro Board will select the locally preferred alternative or final route and mode for this project.
Let's look at the 6 alternatives we'll be studying in environmental review. They are identified with numbers.
All alternatives begin at the Van Nuys Metrolink station, which will provide connections to Metrolink trains, as well as the future Metro East San Fernando Valley Light Rail, Metro G Line, formerly known as the Orange Line, and end on the west side at the Metro E Line, formerly known as the Expo Line.
Alternatives 1, 2, and 3 are monorail.
Alternative 1 is fully aerial, traveling west before heading south along Sepulveda, with stops at the Metro G Line, Sepulveda Station, and Ventura Boulevard. Then it continues over the 405 through Sepulveda Pass with a stop at the Getty Center before continuing to the D Line Westwood VA Station. It then heads south to a stop at Sepulveda Boulevard to end at the current E Line Sepulveda Station. This alternative also includes an electric bus connection from the Westwood VA Station to Veteran Avenue, Westwood Village, and the UCLA campus.
Alternative 2 follows the same route as Alternative 1, but with an automated people mover connection to the UCLA campus from the UCLA Westwood D Line station. An automated people mover is a small-scale, driverless transit mode similar to what you might see at an airport.
Alternative 3 runs along the same aerial route through the Sepulveda Pass and goes underground after the Getty Center to provide an underground connection to the UCLA campus. From there, it connects to the UCLA Westwood D-Line station before returning to an aerial 405 route with a stop at Santa Monica Boulevard and ending at the E-Line Sepulveda station.
Alternatives 4, 5, and 6 are heavy rail.
Alternative 4 has an aerial segment along Sepulveda Boulevard before moving underground after Ventura Boulevard, where it continues underground for the rest of the route. This alternative would have underground stations at the UCLA campus, Westwood UCLA D-Line station, Santa Monica Boulevard, and the E-Line Sepulveda station.
Alternative 5 begins aerial at the Metrolink Van Nuys station and then moves underground along Sepulveda Boulevard for the rest of the route. It heads along Sepulveda with underground stations at Sherman Way, the Metro G-Line Sepulveda station, Ventura Boulevard, UCLA, the Westwood UCLA D-Line station, and Santa Monica Boulevard before ending at the E-Line Sepulveda station.
Alternative 6 is entirely underground. From Van Nuys Station, it heads south under Van Nuys Boulevard, stopping at the G Line Van Nuys Station and Ventura Boulevard. From there, it continues with stops at the UCLA campus, Westwood UCLA D Line Station, and Santa Monica Boulevard, before turning west to end at the E Line Bundy Station.
We're now entering scoping, which is the first step in the environmental review process.
During this stage, we want to hear from you about what Metro should consider and study as we prepare the environmental impact report for the Sepulveda Transit Corridor.
Possible comments might include input on the destinations that you think are important to serve, your preferences for transit in this area, and questions or concerns you might have about project impacts.
We will be conducting virtual scoping meetings where we can hear your comments.
We will also take formal comments via mail, email, our website, or over the phone during the scoping period.
We appreciate your interest in this transformational project and look forward to hearing from you.
Excellent. And our project video is available on our Metro YouTube channel. You can view it both in English and Spanish, and I'm sure we'll also be posting the links to those in the chat shortly. I want to also recognize that we have approximately 98 folks in the webinar room. Once again, we thank you all for joining us today. And with that, I'm now going to turn it over to Jody Litvak with Countywide Planning and Development for the next portion of today's presentation. Jody.
Good morning. Thank you, everybody, for being here. We can move on to the next slide. My name is Jody Litvak, and thank you for taking time out of your Saturday morning to be with us. Before I move on, I just want to mention a couple things. One is we're posting a lot of information in the chat, including links. Those links are live and you can click on them, but you can't really copy them. And I know that's frustrating, but we will be sending out an email after the meeting, I'm assuming Monday, and all of that information with the links will be there. In addition, I want to take a moment to welcome the people joining us today from elected officials, offices, neighborhood councils, and other organizations, specifically Jay Greenstein from Councilmember Koretz's office, From neighborhood councils, we've got Jeffrey Hartsoe from the Sherman Oaks Neighborhood Council, Evan Farrar from the North Westwood Neighborhood Council, Lee Blumenfeld from Encino Neighborhood Council, Glenn McCurry from the Van Nuys Neighborhood Council, Stephen Sand from the Westwood Neighborhood Council, Liana Engie from the Mid-City Neighborhood Council. We also have Jerry Hornoff from the Westdale Homeowners Association. Bart Reed from the Transit Coalition is joining us. Marco Perez from UCLA Government and Community Relations is here, along with Jennifer Poulakidis from UCLA Government Relations and Natalie Schleifstein from the Independent Living Center of Southern California. If you are here from a community organization, a neighborhood council, or an elected official, and we didn't mention you, please put that in the Q&A and we will add that information in. So continuing on, we are here today because Metro has a plan to make it easier to get around Los Angeles, and that includes creating better transit. This project specifically works to provide a competitive transit option to connect the Valley and the West Side with those challenging Santa Monica Mountains in between. Next slide, please. Everything we do at Metro weaves together these four issues or areas of focus of better transit, less congestion, complete streets, and access to opportunity. We are also very much with intention focused on eliminating racial and socioeconomic disparities and advancing environmentally sustainable practices in everything we do. So you are going to hear us hit on all of these things as we talk about this project. They underpin everything we do. And with that, I would like to turn it over to David Meager, our Senior Executive Officer in Countywide Planning, and I'll be back later on.
Hey, thank you, Jody. We can go to the next slide here. Wanted to give a little bit of background to everybody about how important the Sepulveda corridor is to our network. All the lines you see here on this map didn't exist 20 years ago. We've been building this network out, starting in downtown Los Angeles, working our way out to the entire county. And based on the sales tax measure in 2016, we are now capable of building this extended segment of the project, to connect these lines together. I would want to point out the red line you see on the right, which is now our Metro B line, was completed in 2000 under the Cahuenga Pass and connecting downtown Hollywood, Universal City, and North Hollywood. And within a few months of opening that line, the ridership doubled, increased by about 60,000 per day on that line, which were people that previously were either driving through the Cahuenga Pass or taking the limited transit opportunities that existed at that time through the Cahuenga Pass. So it did show to us and demonstrate to us that travel through the pass or through the mountains, the Santa Monica Mountains, is a major transit gold mine of capturing riders who are anxious to ride the system. And the line in the Sepulveda Pass is slightly longer, but as one of the most congested routes we have in the entire country. And so it's a major goal of Metros to try to relieve congestion by giving people opportunities other than the car to drive through the Sepulveda Pass. As we built on the original red line through the Cahuenga Pass, the orange line that you see, which is now the G line, was a BRT, bus rapid transit project from North Hollywood, through Van Nuys out as far as Canoga Park and Chatsworth in the West Valley. That's been one of the most successful bus rapid transit lines in the country, and it's sort of a model for many other cities and agencies around the country to show how to do advanced bus lines. We are converting that line to electric buses to make them quieter and more efficient, and that's going on with other improvements on the orange line. We also, the dashed line in the valley you see there on Van Nuys Boulevard is a light rail project that is currently getting ready to start construction after completing its environmental phase last year, which will provide access to the North Valley, Pacoima, Arleta, the northern sections, Panorama City, the Valley, to bring people in from those communities into the area where the orange line and the Sepulveda line will be. And then on the south, we mentioned before the Expo line, which was opened in 2 phases between 2012 and 2015, and provides access from Santa Monica through the west side in towards North University Park, USC, into the Staples Center area and central downtown LA. been very successful line since it's opened. And then the last line we want to mention, and near and dear to many of you on the west side, the purple line, which is our D line now, under construction in 3 phases, and making good progress in time to be open in time for the 2020 Olympic Games, where UCLA will be one of the venue sites for athletes who are attending the games. Our goal is to get that open. We are actually about halfway complete with the first segment to La Cienega. We're about a little over 30% complete with the section from Beverly Hills to Century City. And then the Century City to VA Hospital and Westwood is actually at let me look at the latest number here, 31% complete, and the tunneling going on in that segment as well. So we're on schedule and it's moving fast to get that line open. So we'll have a connection for this in the next few years. Next slide. We also are not just only looking at one improvement in the Sepulveda Pass. You know, the speeds on during the rush hour, even during COVID, have been very limited, and people, even our bus routes that run through the Sepulveda Pass, over an hour to get through the Sepulveda Pass from the valley to the west side to UCLA. This needs to have other addresses. This project will help that tremendously, but we also have had success with improvements for the cars through the Sepulveda Pass by our other projects we've had. We have express lanes in other segments along the 10 freeway, the 110, soon on the 105, where we're looking at express lanes where during congested periods, there's a pricing option where if you are in a carpool, you can ride in a lane that's operating at up to 45 miles per hour during that rush hour period. And with a carpool, you can ride generally for free. But if you're a single occupant vehicle, you can pay in that lane, and the price is set based on the levels of congestion in order to price it and keep the lanes and the traffic flowing at the 45 mile an hour speed. And we are looking at that for the central lanes of the 405 through the Sepulveda Pass. We're also looking at the 405 Comprehensive Multimodal Corridor Study, which looks at where the 405 starts way up in the North Valley, where it branches off of the 5, all the way through this area, down through the South Bay towards the Orange County line, and looking at just improvements to be made along the 405, ramp improvements, on and off ramps, auxiliary lanes, things to address the bottlenecks without necessarily widening the freeway, but actually looking at improvements to the existing freeway that we have. And then also a traffic reduction study, which isn't just this area, but a little bit more system-wide, looking at areas where other type of pricing policies or management policies could be put into place to help keep traffic moving. So a lot of activities. I know that a lot of you are getting barraged by requests to come to public meetings. The Express Lanes project has an environmental document going at the same time as this one. So we appreciate your understanding and our efforts to look at a lot of different solutions to help the problems of congestion in this area. Next slide, just to recap what was in the video about the studies we've been doing. Measure M is sort of the genesis. It was approved by the voters in the county by 71% to approve a sales tax to help pay for this and many other improvements throughout the county. That was what allowed us to proceed. And then in 2017 and 2019, after the measure was approved, we conducted a feasibility study, which looked at a range of different options for transit service through the pass, and narrowed it down to 3 that we felt were the highest performing and most likely to be successful based on those early studies. And they included heavy rail alternatives, which we see now, and also monorail. And so those were the 2 highest performing options that were identified through that study. And based on that, we solicited the private sector to submit proposals for this, what we're calling these pre-development agreements, where we're asking the private sector to give us their best input. For these are firms and partners who have done these projects throughout the world, throughout the US. We want to tap their expertise to tell us what's the cutting edge, the latest technologies that can solve this problem, and bring them to the table early before we get too far into the environmental studies. Let them develop their designs at the same time that we're working with all the community members to get the input into that, refine the designs, and come up with what we think is a good combination for a potential public-private partnership to deliver this line. And then the initiation of environmental review is the part that we started November 30th. We're in it right now, and we're going to be concluding on February 11th, but this is our 3rd public meeting that we've had on the project. And with that, I think we have one more slide, and I'll move on to the next slide from this. I would want to mention too, just that this project isn't meant to stop at the Wilshire Boulevard or at Santa Monica or at the Expo line. There is a phase 2 of the project. We're looking ultimately to get this project further south all the way down to LAX to connect to all the new improvements at LAX and provide a one-seat ride from the Valley to the airport. So that is certainly a phase 2 of this project, that we're building this project not to preclude, and we'll be looking at opportunities to do that. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Kavita Mehta, who's leading our effort with the PDA firms and the engineering design, and let her tell you a little bit more about that part of the project.
Thank you, David. Good morning, everyone. I am Kavita Mehta, Deputy Executive Officer with Metro Program Management and Project Manager for the Sepulveda pre-development agreements. So why are we doing a pre-development agreement for this project? We understand the need for this project in this highly congested corridor. What we also know is, given the topography and the built environment, the design and construction of this project is also going to be quite challenging. So with this PDA approach, we are involving contractors who build projects during the early planning and design phases, so we can make sure right from the beginning that we are designing something that can ultimately be constructed. We also anticipate this PDA approach and early private sector involvement to bring about technical and financial innovation. The PDA approach allows us to think about cost effectiveness over the life of the project. So we are not just thinking about what is cost effective to design and construct, but what is cost effective to also operate and maintain in the long run. And lastly, it should allow for schedule acceleration. Next slide. These are the key milestones in the PDA process. It was back in July of 2019, Metro Board approved the PDA approach for this project. We conducted industry outreach, issued the RFP, went through the evaluation process and awarded 2 contracts to LA Skyrail Express for their proposed monorail technology and Sepulveda Transit Corridor Partners for their proposed heavy rail technology. And in August of last year, we issued the NTPs to both the PDA teams. Next slide. Metro Program Management oversees both the PDA teams. So my team and I, we manage both the PDA teams. We review their work products, and we also coordinate very closely with my colleagues in planning to provide the necessary input for the environmental process. This is a little bit different. Program management usually gets involved during advanced design and construction phases. But here, since we are following a PDA approach, program management is involved during these early phases, again, to make sure that we are designing something that can ultimately be constructed. We take a life cycle approach to the project, and we take advantage of the input and expertise the private sector partners can bring during this early phase of the project that can help us during the later phases. So since coming on board in August of last year, the PDA teams have been working on refining the concepts that they submitted as part of their proposal. So those concepts have been refined into distinct alternatives, which you heard about in the video, and you're going to hear about the alternatives more later. And from here on to, the PDA process is going to continue to be responsive to the environmental process. So we will take the comments that are provided as part of the scoping process, continue to refine the alternatives in response to the comments as feasible. And it is the refined alternatives which are going to move forward for evaluation into the environmental document. And with that, I will hand it over to Jackie.
Thanks, Kavita. Next slide, please. Hi, everyone. I am Jackie Sue, Senior Transportation Planner with Metro Planning. As we think about project goals and objectives, let's talk about current transit service. The Sepulveda Corridor provides an essential transportation link between the San Fernando Valley and the West Side. Over 400,000 people travel the corridor each weekday, but less than 2% do so by transit. Congestion on roads and freeways affects transit service as well as private vehicles, and the table in this slide provides some additional insight. These transit lines, which operate between the Valley and the West Side, have average speeds less than 20 miles per hour, and their on-time performance is in the 50% range. So because of slow travel speeds and unreliable travel times, current transit service in the project corridor is not competitive with travel by car. Next slide. This leads us into a discussion of the purpose of the project. The purpose of the Sepulveda Transit Corridor project is to provide a high-quality transit service that effectively serves a large and growing travel market between the San Fernando Valley and the West Side. Next slide. The project goals and objectives will help guide the environmental process and identify the merits and challenges of each alternative. These goals and objectives might look familiar to you because they're informed by the goals and objectives from the feasibility study. Since that early planning study, we have updated these goals based on the work of the feasibility study and associated outreach, and we have also updated the goals to further emphasize equity and sustainability. The project has 6 goals. The first of these goals is to improve mobility, which means increasing transit frequency, decreasing travel time between the Valley and the West Side, increasing transit ridership, prioritizing connections to local points of interest and destinations, promoting efficiency of transfer experience, and promoting non-automobile first last mile connections, which means walking, riding, or rolling to and from a transit station. The second goal is to improve accessibility and promote equity. This means improving access for equity-focused communities, which are communities in which a percentage of residents are low income, people of color, and have no access to a vehicle. This goal also emphasizes identifying and pursuing investments that serve those with the greatest mobility needs. The third goal is to provide a cost-effective solution and to minimize risk, maximizing benefits to the public relative to cost, and maximizing potential eligibility for state and federal funding opportunities. Next slide. The fourth goal is to support community and economic development, which means increasing opportunity for economic growth around stations, minimizing physical barriers to communities, and prioritizing station placement and design that's consistent with community context, essentially being a good neighbor. The fifth goal is to protect environmental resources and support a sustainable transportation system, including reducing vehicle miles traveled, greenhouse gas emissions, and other air pollutants, in addition to addressing potential impacts to environmental resources. And the sixth goal is to enhance resiliency, improving the resiliency of the metro system to natural disasters and climate change. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Peter to discuss project alternatives.
Thank you, Jackie. And let me just start by thanking people for joining us at today's meeting. We really appreciate your engagement with the project. So the Sepulveda Transit Corridor project would construct and operate a dedicated piece of transportation infrastructure across the Santa Monica Mountains through the Sepulveda Pass. All the alternatives would have a northern terminus, which is to say an end of the line in the north at the Van Nuys Metrolink Amtrak station. And they would end in the south with a southern terminus at the Metro E line, formerly known as the Expo line. And we'll talk a little bit more about what happens in between those two endpoints in the next few slides. We're looking at 3 different transit technologies across the 6 alternatives that are being considered. And all of these transit technologies have sufficient capacity to meet the ridership demands of the project. We're looking at an automated monorail, an automated heavy rail, and the driver-operated heavy rail train. Next slide, please. So the next 6 slides are looking specifically at our 6 alternatives. And alternative 1 is the first of 3 monorail alternatives. All of the monorail alternatives operate in an aerial alignment, which is to say that they are elevated up in the air on columns, and they're within the 405 corridor. What's different about alternative 1 is the use of a bus connection to access the UCLA area. So the monorail alignment length for alternative 1 is 15.3 miles long. And starting from the south, the stations on alternative 1 include the Metro E line, Santa Monica Boulevard, the Metro D line, Getty Center 101, the Metro G line, Sherman Way, and the Van Nuys Metrolink station. The bus connection that I mentioned happens at the Metro D line at the Westwood VA station. We also have identified potential maintenance and storage facility sites to accompany the alternatives. And for alternative 1, the monorail maintenance and storage facility site, which is a place where these vehicles are being kept in good repair and stored when not in use. That site would be up at the Metro G line, Sepulveda Station parking lot, and a separate maintenance and storage facility site for the electric bus associated with this alternative would be co-located with the UCLA Bruin bus facility on the west side. Next slide, please. Alternative 2 is our second monorail alternative, and the differentiating feature of Alternative 2 is the use of an automated people mover to access the UCLA area. The monorail alignment length is 15.8 miles long. It's a little bit longer, and you can see on the inset map there that the alignment comes out of the 405 corridor to about Veteran Avenue and Wilshire Boulevard, which is where it makes that connection to the automated people mover. The automated people mover then moves in an aerial configuration to access the UCLA campus. The stations for Alternative 2 are the same as for Alternative 1, and the maintenance and storage facility site for the monorail is in the same location as Alternative 1. The MSF site for the automated people mover is located above the UCLA Bruin bus facility. Alternative 3 is our third monorail alternative. And what's different about Alternative 3 is the use of an underground alignment to access the UCLA campus. You can see that the monorail alignment length is a little bit longer, 16.2 miles. And there's one additional station, and that's a station at the UCLA campus. The underground portion of this alternative is denoted by that thicker line type, and you can see that it starts from just south of the Getty Center to just north of Wilshire Boulevard. And the maintenance and storage facility site for this alternative is in the same location as for alternatives 1 and 2. Next slide, please. Alternative 4 is the first of 3 heavy rail alternatives that we're looking at. And what's different about Alternative 4 is the use of an aerial alignment along Sepulveda Boulevard in the valley. There are 4 underground stations starting from the south, and they include the Metro E line, Santa Monica Boulevard, the Metro D line, and a station at the UCLA campus. And then on the other side of the Santa Monica Mountains, there are 4 aerial stations: Ventura Boulevard, the Metro G line, Sherman Way, and the Van Nuys Metrolink station. The maintenance and storage facility site for Alternative 4 is located south of the Metrolink tracks and just to the west of Woodman Avenue. Next slide, please. Alternative 5 is the second heavy rail alternative, and the differentiating feature of Alternative 5 is the use of an underground alignment along Sepulveda Boulevard in the valley. The stations are the same. The exception is that they're all underground, except for the Van Nuys Metrolink station. The maintenance storage facility site for Alternative 5 is in the same location as for Alternative 4. And finally, Alternative 6 has the differentiating features of an underground alignment along Van Nuys Boulevard in the valley and a southern terminus connection in the south to the Metro E line at Bundy. The 7 stations for Alternative 6 include the Metro E line, Santa Monica Boulevard, the Metro D line, UCLA, Ventura Boulevard, the Metro G line, and the Van Nuys Metrolink station. The maintenance and storage facility site for Alternative 6 is located north of the Metrolink tracks and just to the east of Van Nuys Boulevard. Next slide, please. We're also looking at a no project alternative, and this is an alternative that considers all existing transportation infrastructure as well as future transit and highway projects that are scheduled to be operational by 2045, with the exception of this project that's being studied. Next slide, please. So now as we continue forward, we'll take a look at a little bit more about the environmental process. And as we can see by the yellow marker, we've just gotten started with environmental review as our scoping period has commenced. So still very early in our process. Even that environmental review, when it's finished, will be followed by further engineering, design, and construction before the line becomes operational. Next slide, please. So we call what we're in now the scoping period, and we say that what we're talking about is determining the scope of the draft environmental impact report, which is the first environmental document that we'll be preparing to talk about the project with the public. There'll be a lot of information in there. At the summary level, there'll be various types of evaluations, including costs. We'll be looking at construction costs, right-of-way costs, annual operating costs. We'll also be looking at benefits of the project, things like overall ridership, reductions in automobile miles traveled, and increased mobility for equity-focused communities. And we'll also be looking at what we call environmental impacts, or the effects of the project on the surrounding environment. This would include things like looking at property acquisitions that might be necessary for the different alternatives. At a more detailed level, we'll be looking at things like conceptual engineering plans for each of the alternatives. And those plans would include track alignments, typical cross sections, station layouts, right-of-way impacts. We'll also be having environmental technical reports, which will analyze each of the alternatives, and we'll get a little bit more about that on the next slide. So the draft environmental impact report will be studying the potential effects of construction and operation of the alternatives and evaluate measures to avoid, minimize, and mitigate those potential environmental impacts. In terms of the types of things we'll be looking at, we can see some examples of the potential impacts to be studied in this slide here, and it gives you a sense of the depth and breadth of topic areas that are being considered. Next slide, please. So public participation is an integral part of our environmental process. And from now through the end of our scoping period on February 11th, I would encourage all of you to take a closer look at the alternatives, the maps, the project objectives, all of the materials that we've provided, and give us your feedback. Let us know what you think about the different elements in the alternatives that are being considered and how they might be improved or changed. And let us know what questions you'd like to see answered in that environmental document that we're preparing in the draft environmental impact report. And with that, I will hand things back to Jody.
Hi, everyone. Just go back to the last slide for a moment, if you could. I want to stress that very last point, the questions that should be answered as a part of the study. I'm going to say for the first time today, and probably not the last, that I understand that this phase of the planning process can be very frustrating for those of you who are joining us, because you have a lot of questions about the alternatives and the project. And we are, as we saw in an earlier slide, at the very earliest stage of the planning, even though we've done some technical work to get us to this point. The purpose of the study is to answer those questions. We are going to be doing a lot of analysis. So ask those questions, get them on the record, tell us what information you want the study to provide you. And you will be frustrated because we don't have those answers right now. So hang in there with us, and as the study moves forward, we will get more information and we will be sharing that with you. But I just want to make sure everybody understands that, that we don't have these answers now. We will provide them during the course of the study and let you know that I understand and appreciate your frustration with that. And now we can go on to the next slide. While that's coming up, we've had a few more representatives of elected officials and key organizations join us that I want to note as well. We have Lilia Monterosa from Congressman Tony Cardenas's office, Doug Mensman representing Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti, Mehmet Burker from Councilmember Nithya Raman's office. We also have Kimberly Christensen from the Westside Neighborhood Council and Nuran Kalajian from the Woodland Hills Neighborhood Council. Okay, so we've, thank you all much for showing up. One of these ways you see here is how you heard about all of this. When we began scoping, we issued a notice of preparation. That's the formal way you do that. We shared that with public agency and in legal ads and online with Metro's blogs. We've had a targeted Spanish media and social media campaign. We have our project website, our phone line, our email. We have an interactive story map. We have frequently asked questions that we're always looking to tweak and update. We have the project video that you saw earlier. We have an email database of more than 15,000 And we've put bus car cards on Metro vehicles and in many of our partner vehicles. Let's go on to the next slide. Okay, so these are all the ways to provide comments. And again, if you don't have this all now, we will be emailing it out to you. But again, there's comments today. You can send us regular mail by snail mail. You can email us or phone us at the information provided here, and you can go to our online forum and send it in that way. Let's go on to the next slide, please. Okay, keep going. So again, the key topics we want to hear from you about. What do you think about our purpose and objectives and goals for the project? The alternatives that are being considered and the issues for environmental analysis. Again, what are the questions you want this study to answer? And again, I know you're frustrated because you're going to ask those questions and we can't provide those answers now. We don't have them. You will have 2 minutes to speak. We will be listening to your comments and your questions and not answering them at this point. The more specific you can be, the better. But we want to hear from you anyway. By the way, comment about the 2 minutes. If you need Spanish interpretation, that will be doubled to 4. Please use the raise hand feature if you want to speak. I'm sorry, let's go on to the next slide. There we go. Again, and by the way, if you're joining us by phone, well, hold on, before I say that, I know some people have already put their name in the hat, as it were, to speak. So the way this is going to happen is you're going to hear me ask a lovely person named Stevie to help us out. She will indicate the names of the next 3 people to speak. So the first person, the second person, the third person, and then when that first person speaks, she'll repeat it again. Number 2 will move up to number 1 and so on. Stevie, who are the first 3 we have ready to go?
First 3 callers are Carol M, Stephen S, and Toby L.
Okay, you 3 please wait. Let me just go through this again. If you want to speak, use the raise hand function. We will call on you in the order received, just in the method that Stevie demonstrated. Go ahead and unmute your microphone when you're called on. Start by telling your name for the record, and if you're with an organization, do that as well. You might want to spell that for us. And those of you who are joining us by phone, you can press *9 to raise your hand, and then when we call on you, press *6 to unmute yourself. Again, the links in the chat are live, and we will be sending that information out to you later on. So with that, let's give us our first 3 people again, and then that first person can go ahead and speak. Thank you, everybody. This was our 3rd and final scoping meeting. The other 2 are posted, and we'll be back in touch. See you all in the future, and everybody enjoy your weekend. Bye-bye. Thank you.